All right, I am here. Twitch.tv/110sports, 110sportsmedia.com/live. Thank you so much for joining us on a Wednesday. Somehow, the Dodgers won a World Series last night for the first time in 32 years, and it is not the biggest story from Major League Baseball yesterday. It's not what we're talking about today. You know, a team wins a World Series. You know, LeBron wins a World Series. We spend the next week talking about him in the GOAT conversation. We talk about the best moments of the Lakers championship run, this, that, and the other. And typically, now, of course, LeBron's the only active player in this country right now, apart from Tom Brady, who is the undisputed GOAT. But everything Tom Brady does is just another notch in his column and further away from who's ever behind him. LeBron is actively pursuing somebody that at least is considered the GOAT by most people. I think most people consider Jordan the GOAT. They're, of course, the LeBron people. I respect those people. But today, we're talking about Justin Turner. First of all, we're talking about several things. We're talking about number one, we're talking about, one moment, please. We're talking about Justin Turner getting to take the field with an inconclusive test. In the second inning, the Major League Baseball learned that Justin Turner's test came back inconclusive. First of all, he should have never been able to take the field. I don't care how long it's been since you had a positive test. I don't care. Because it can happen to literally anybody at any time. So the fact, and that also makes me wonder, like, how long had that been sort of the protocol here? How long had they been allowing players to take the field without 100% knowing if they're positive or not? Because that's question number one, right? Justin Turner took the field. He didn't have his test back at all. Right. If they learned that it was inconclusive in the second, then it would stand to reason that there were a bunch of players who learned that they had tested negative in the second inning, right? There's issues with him taking the field at all. But if it's inconclusive, you take him out of the game right then. Instead, you wait until the seventh inning, the sixth inning, whatever inning it was. And then you get a positive test, and then you take him out of the game. Not ideal, but you take him out when you see the positive test. Okay, fine. There are, of course, issues with them taking the field at all, but okay, fine. But then next, then you isolate him. There's this. Okay, we've isolated him to stop the spread. We've removed him from the game to prevent any widespread COVID-19 cases between the two teams. Yada yada yada. Have you seen this picture? The picture going around social media and the sports world right now? If you haven't, you need to see this picture. And I'll try to pull it up for you real quick here. But it's just, first of all, it's nobody wearing a mask. Look at this. Okay, we're going to crop it a little bit. You know, we're just going to put it on the screen. There you go. Look at that. That's Justin Turner not wearing a mask with a bunch of other people not wearing masks. And that man just tested positive for COVID-19. Literally just tested positive for COVID-19. I'm not I genuinely don't know how you let that happen. And this isn't even a commentary on what you think about the deadliness of COVID-19, whether you consider it to just be the flu, whether you think, of course, a healthy athlete's not all that in all that much danger of actually getting like terminally ill from this virus. But if for no other reason, it's a PR nightmare for you to let the guy that just tested positive for COVID-19 not social distance with his teammates and not wear a mask. I get that you want him to be in the picture. I do. That's fine, whatever. But you would think that maybe the guy testing positive for COVID-19 might be a little bit of a more pressing issue. That's just my thought. Maybe I'm wrong. But I don't think that's all that ridiculous to suggest that maybe you should consider not bringing him back out onto the field. That's just my thought. Maybe that's a silly thought. But that's the thought that I have right now. And what really sucks is that happening turned what should have been a night all about baseball. And of course, that's the way that this 2020 season ends, because it's 2020 and it puts a lovely bookmark on what happened at the beginning of this season. But instead of talking about how the Dodgers won their first title in 32 years, and instead of talking about how they finally got it done, and instead of talking about how good Mookie Betts was, or the timely hitting, or the bad decision making from Kevin Cash, we're talking about Justin Turner and how Major League Baseball once again gets a tarnish. It gets a blemish, and their resume for this year is tarnished. I mean, this could end up being bad. This was a guy in close proximity with his teammates in the locker, in the clubhouse, in the dugout, standing next to home plate. Now, I understand that the dugout and on the field are in the open, and there's a lot of studies suggesting that's the safest place to be if you're going to be around people, is outside. I get all of that. I do. But what if in a week, by the time we're to next Tuesday, that the Dodgers have had 15, 20 positive COVID cases? Like, that could happen. Because there was clearly a guy just hanging out in the organization around everybody, and then allowed to go back out on the field, all while being sick. It sounds like it's a shocking mismanagement from Major League Baseball. And like I said, it makes me wonder how many corners they've been cutting and just getting lucky, specifically in these playoffs. NBA guys were getting tested even in the bubble. Even though you get to the point where, like, probably there's no COVID anywhere in the Orlando facilities. You keep getting tested in case. And even though the Major League Baseball has created this bubble of sorts, which really just means everybody's staying in the same hotel and everybody's playing in the same ballpark. It's just not a good look. And clearly, Major League Baseball just thought that, okay, we've been in here the Dodgers have been here since the beginning of the NLCS. They're not gonna be any positive cases. So how long have they been cutting corners? How long have they been putting players on the field without their most recent COVID test having returned? These are questions that we need to ask now. And I suppose the most important part here is that there haven't been, so they've gotten lucky. Turner had a test from Monday, come back inconclusive in the second inning. Once the lab completed running a test from Tuesday, MLB was informed Turner tested positive and immediately told the Dodgers that he had to come out of the game. If he tested inconclusive on Monday, he shouldn't have played on Tuesday at all. Second inning on Monday. And now sure, he was masked when he came back onto the field, but I just showed you the picture. He's got nothing on his face. It's absolutely baffling. It is. So for 24 hours, Turner tests a Monday test that came back inconclusive in the second inning. Then they let him on the field on Tuesday. They should have taken him out on Monday. And if he doesn't come back, that's tough. That was one of the things we talked about before any sports came back is, okay, what if somebody like that could change the dynamic of a series if somebody has to sit out for a while. Justin Turner ultimately went 0 for 3 with 2 strikeouts in the game. And then Kike Hernandez came in and he also struck out. So guys in the 3 spot struck out 3 times. So ultimately, if you just look at it like that, it wouldn't have mattered if Turner was in the game or not. But the point still stands that it's quite shocking that he was able to step on the field without a conclusive COVID test, a conclusive negative COVID test. As for the game itself, Blake Snell, 5 1/3, 2 hits, 1 earned run, and that 1 earned run he got only because he got taken out after a single after 5 1/3, and that guy ended up coming around and scoring because Nick Anderson was just useless in the playoffs. 73 pitches, had struck out Betts, Seager, and Turner twice in their first 2 at-bats. The first 3 guys in the Dodgers order were 0 for 6 with 6 strikeouts. Betts and Seager, 2 best hitters on that Dodgers team, in my opinion, all-around hitters. 0 for 4 Ks in their first 2 at-bats against Snell. Two hits, 9 Ks through 5 1/3, 73 pitches, Kevin Cash takes him out, and immediately the Dodgers take the lead. Immediately. Mookie Betts wreaking havoc on the base pass again, and you go from a game that Snell could have gone. I mean, what's he gonna do? Pitch tomorrow? No. Oh, you're right. They were getting to him. No. 73 pitches. Absolutely lights out the entire time. And you take him out. You knew that one run wasn't going to be enough to win this game. You knew that. But the best chance of you to have one run win this game is to let Snell go longer. Screw the analytics. Screw the advanced metrics. Screw the plan. The Dodgers wanted 5 innings out of Gonsolin. That's what they were hoping for. That was their plan. Now, Dave Roberts was probably a little premature taking him out, but that was their plan. They pivoted, and after Gonsolin's inning in 2/3, 6 different Dodger pitchers came in to combine for a 2-hit shutout. And Urias was elite at the end of this game again, like he was in Game 7 of the NLCS. Dave Roberts and the Dodgers shifted from their plan when it was clear that the plan wasn't going to be the best way to win this game. Because Gonsolin just didn't have it. That can be done when you're just playing and when your pitcher is dealing. You're allowed to do that, dog. 5 1/3. Mookie hasn't been able to hit left-handers all year, and Seager is a left-hander, and when Blake Snell is dealing, no left-hander can touch him. He's like Kershaw in that sense. I'm not completely putting them on the same level, but it's 2 Cy Young winners. And when Snell has that slider going to a lefty, you can't touch him. You can't touch him. And Seager couldn't touch him, and Betts couldn't touch him. And immediately, Betts hits a rope down the left field line. Then there's a pass ball. Then Mookie, great base running. 2-1. And you felt like that. And I was hoping the game wasn't over, but you had that feeling of, oh man, the game's over. Game's over. And then Betts, goes and gets a solo shot in the bottom of the 8th, 3-1, and then at that point you just know. And the last, like, can you imagine? You will never catch me striking out looking in the World Series in the top of the 9th when we have 3 outs left. 2. The last 2 batters for the Rays both struck out looking. Their season was on the line. A World Series was on the line, and they struck out looking. Swing the baseball bat. Back in the day, that was the thing that got my dad the angriest with me when I was playing baseball. If I didn't swing the bat. You strike out, fine. You go 0 for 4, fine. You have a bad outing on the mound, fine. Those things happen. But you know what you're never going to do? Get a hit when you don't swing the bat. And the Rays just didn't feel like swinging the bat in the 9th inning. Both of those pitches were right down the middle, too. Maybe the Adames was like belt high on the inner half. But Wendell just let the ball, 3-2 was a great at bat, and then Wendell just didn't swing at the one right down the middle. Whatever. We're going to talk to Chris Brown about all of this coming up next. Chris Brown, our resident 110 Sports expert. be on the lookout for him for his post-World Series writing. But right now we're going to talk to him right after this break. You're watching the JMULL Show, 110sportsmedia.com. Welcome back to the JMULL Show on a Wednesday, twitch.tv/110sports, 110sportsmedia.com. The World Series is over. The Dodgers win a World Series, but that might not be, probably isn't, the biggest story on the morning after. Here to talk about all of it is 110 Sports' Chris Brown. Chris, how you doing?
Doing pretty good, Josh. Thanks for having me on. Always happy to talk baseball, and we have, a lot of more storylines. I mean, you think we'd have enough storylines just with the end of the World Series on its own, but then you add in everything else that's happening, and we got plenty of things stewing in the baseball world here in this day after the World Series. That's for sure.
If somebody asked you to tell them what happened in Game 7 of the World Series last night, what would you tell them first? Would you tell them that the Dodgers won, or that Justin Turner just played the majority of Game 5 and most of Game 6 with an inconclusive test that was ultimately positive?
Yeah, so I mean, I think my overall takeaway is still the Dodgers ending a 32-year championship drought. Mm-hmm. I think that's still my, big thing that I would be saying first, but I mean, it's certainly being overshadowed in a lot of ways by what we've seen with Justin Turner and everything that transpired there. I mean, you talked about it here at the top of the show. Everything that happened there really, it's really, quite frankly, it's, it is irresponsible, reckless behavior that occurred, in Turner coming back on the field after everything that happened there. Of course, there's also, like you talked about, the fact that Turner was allowed to be in that game to begin with, which was actually a violation of MLB's health and safety protocols, which require the removal of players with inconclusive tests. So
Gotcha.
You start with that aspect, which was that he shouldn't have been on the field, like you said, to begin with. And it was not only should he have just not been on the field in a common sense perspective to begin the game, that was in violation of MLB's health and safety protocols. And then you have, like you said, everything that happened afterward. Apparently, from what I'm reading this morning and reports from Ken Rosenthal, that Turner, of course, like you said, the situation with the inconclusive test, eventually another test with a new sample, it comes back positive. He's taken out of the game. And apparently, league officials and league security personnel and some Dodgers officials told Turner that they wanted him to remain in isolation after the game. But apparently, Turner was adamant about wanting to join the celebration, had the support of at least some club officials, and nobody stopped him. Apparently, after he went back out on the field, there were MLB officials who instructed the security there to get him back into isolation, but he refused. That's according to the Wall Street Journal. So apparently, this is a situation where, and this isn't to, excuse any types of behaviors. This is all still being sorted out. But it apparently was pretty clear that there were league officials who, did not want this to happen with Turner, who did not want him to go out there, who told him such, and that he went out there without, against their what they told him to do. But at the end of the day, nobody stopped him. And at the end of the day, of course, he is a grown adult who should be held responsible for his decisions and his actions. And so that was just a really, it's too bad that we're in a situation where we're talking, where this is one of the big storylines after, such a long drought ending. And I think there are a lot of unanswered questions, like you talked about, that are going to drag on for the baseball is going to have to answer for in one way or another, whether we like the answer or not.
Right. That's interesting, because I will admit I had not read that yet this morning. That changes things. That certainly changes things a little bit, and of course that puts any MLB official who has to be the person to stand in front of Justin Turner and say no, you can't do this. That just means you're going face to face with the dude who has COVID-19, and that's not a fun proposition either. The biggest, honestly, so that is certainly interesting, and while that certainly doesn't alleviate Major League Baseball of any of the blame for letting this happen, at least what happened afterwards, it doesn't alleviate them from all of the blame, but I think some of it would be certainly fair to take off of them. My biggest question that I posed in the first segment of the show is how a couple things. If he gets an inconclusive test in the second inning of Game 5, it's not an outrageous thing to assume that that there were other players who also didn't get their test back until after that game started. And then, of course, you have this inconclusive test that ends up negative, that ends up positive, and like you said, it goes against Major League protocol, Major League Baseball COVID protocol. My question now is, has Major League Baseball at least in the playoffs, been cutting corners on their own COVID rules? Because that's a blatant, that's not a mistake. That is a blatant just sort of foregoing of the rules that the league itself had put into place. That's my biggest question here is, had they just gotten lucky this entire postseason, getting tests back in the second inning and just not having any positive ones? Because that's kind of what it sounds like if this is how they were operating.
Yeah, it's certainly a valid line of questioning, undoubtedly. It sounds to me like, from what I understand and what I've been reading and what's been reported, it sounds like there has still been, and this is something that happened in the beginning of the regular season, there was this delay in getting testing results for several days, and they clearly speeded that up. But it sounds to me like, from what I'm reading, hundreds of tests are being shipped from Texas to the lab that MLB has been using in Utah every day. And apparently the results typically come back in the early evening the next day. So it sounds like, Monday's test results typically may not be coming back until the Tuesday evening, which obviously that's not as fast of a turnaround as you want. So it sounds to me like what happened here was that Turner's, that's the sort of the system that they've been working under, is that they may be starting games potentially, or just about to start games, and not having, and just then be receiving the test from yesterday, those results back. And so there's just sort of the idea that, we're in the bubble and we're getting tested daily, we're getting results daily. There's just this delay. And so, as a result of that, it's obviously not an ideal situation. But then apparently it sounds like this kind of thing may be happening where results were trickling in as games were starting. And that's what happened there. But, it certainly raises questions about how this process has worked. I mean, undoubtedly. And, it sounds like, and this is something the baseball would never have wanted to admit during the playoffs or even now, it sounds like they just were not getting the turnaround on testing that they really should have been, where where there's a delay of potentially playing, a game or starting game when you don't have your latest test results, or even maybe your second most recent test results. So that's obviously problematic, and it raises a lot of questions, like you said, and I don't know how many answers we're actually going to get from the league, because I imagine that a lot of it's going to be just damage control to the extent of because they can say that, we tried to stop Turner and we didn't want this to happen this way, and maybe he gets punished somehow, because they can kind of say that, and then they can try to hope to sweep it under the rug of the off season. I think that there's a good chance they don't really get held accountable for some of the systems that were in place. But I think it's questions that need to continue to be asked, because it's really valid to understand what happened here.
Yeah, I completely agree. I guess to a certain extent at this point now, you can also, if you're Major League Baseball, say, well, it doesn't matter if that's actually how we were doing it at this point, because we got all the way through the playoffs without a positive COVID test, which seems like a cop out. But I think it's important to remember here. It's like I genuinely don't care how they make sure that they don't have positive tests. I'm just more interested in there not be positive tests. But of course, when you have a process like this puts you in a really sticky situation when you do have a positive test that you aren't expecting. It is the most baffling part to me here is the fact that he had an inconclusive test for 24 hours and then still was able to step on the field in Game 6. That's much more difficult to defend than I think the idea of him being able to play with the inconclusive test, even if both break the rules in the same manner. Yeah. I certainly am with you there. I think we all sort of just got into this, because things had been going so well, and it had been something like 58 or approaching 60 days since there'd been a positive test, that, it only makes sense that, the kind of scrutiny that people were having on the system and the daily questions of players and teams about how the system is working sort of disappeared. And as a result, we all kind of we weren't thinking about it, right? Nobody was really questioning how that system was working. And all of a sudden now we see, they were this close to getting there, getting all the way through the World Series. And now there's those questions that pop up, but, Certainly with you there. Let's talk about what happened on the field. That's much more enjoyable to talk about, or not if you're Kevin Cash. Can you justify Kevin Cash taking out Blake Snell, who'd thrown 73 pitches through 5 1/3, had 9 Ks and just 2 hits at the time? Is there a way to? And his only earned run came at the expense of the base runner that was left on when he exited the game. Can you defend that in any way, shape, or form? I'm having a hard time coming up with one myself.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly difficult. The only defense that I will give, and it's not really a defense in that I think that it was the right move in any sense, but the only defense that I can give is that there was no scenario, no realistic scenario in which Blake Snell was ever going to face a batter in that lineup for a third time. And I think in the eyes of Kevin Cash, going into that game, and no matter what happened, Blake Snell's job was to get through the lineup 2 times, and that was his job. And unless things went disastrous before he got through 2 times through the order and had to pull him early, otherwise he was going to go through the lineup 2 times, and then they were going to pull him. And that was just, I think, in the eyes of Kevin Cash, Blake Snell's job in Game 6. That was his job, get through the lineup 2 times. And so that's the only, defense I will give, is that that was what Cash wanted Snell to do, and he did the job. And then he decided, you're right, it's all like you've been talking about, like everyone's talking about. It's all about he just wasn't going to adjust the plan. Like that was just he was never going to adjust the plan, and so it's one of those things where I guess it doesn't change the criticism, the very, very valid criticism of him for taking Snell out. But I guess it's one of those things where I look at it and I'm like, well, he was never going to leave Snell in. So I guess it's really more of a criticism, I guess, of that line of thinking, of that system, if you will, rather than that one individual game. And, I mean, you laid out the reasons. I mean, you laid out all the, from the guys that were coming up, his numbers against lefties, and then of course you factor in the guy that Kevin Cash brought in had allowed a run in 6 straight postseason games.
Right.
So that's not exactly helping matters. I mean, you've got a great bullpen to turn to, and Nick Anderson's a great reliever, but you're turning to a guy who has been bad for most of the postseason.
Yeah.
So, at the end of the day, I think it's going to lead to a continuation of the discussion of the role of analytics within baseball. And the only thing I think really sort of irritates me about this on some level is when people boil it down to either, you're either for analytics or you're for going with your gut, because it's really not, it's not like one or the other.
Right.
Numbers, analytics, all these things are important tools, but they can be used as rationale for all different types of moves. Because it's analytics, it's numbers to say, Blake Snell struggles the 3rd time through the order, Rays pitchers struggle the 3rd time through the order. But it's also looking at the numbers and making analytical decisions to look at the individual numbers from that game. The 0 for 6 with 6 strikeouts, those are numbers. The 73 pitches, those are factors to look at too. So, it's not as straightforward as like, you're either, this is the analytics going wild and showing that it doesn't belong in the game. It's just how you use them. And Kevin Cash was really, really rigid with his approach, and it cost him.
Right. I think coming from the, a lens of the NBA more than anything, the thing that makes a coach, the thing that makes good coaches great in the NBA is their ability to adapt based on what's happening and to make mid-series adjustments and things of that nature. And I think what this game boiled down to, and it was 2 different situations, but Dave Roberts, there's a difference between, like, of course you have a game plan and you have a way that you like things to go. And more than, most often you have to change the game plan because it doesn't go the way you thought it would in a negative way. There's also a world in which you can change your game plan because of things are different in a positive way. Dave Roberts knew right away that Gonsolin did not have it, and you and I were talking when Gonsolin got taken out of the game when he did, and felt like there was a bit of a short leash. But then looking at Gonsolin's numbers, it was clear that he just didn't have it last night. And so Dave Roberts goes to his bullpen early, and then 6 Dodgers pitchers come out of the pen to combine for a 2-hit shutout the rest of the way. Maybe, Kevin Cash needed to adapt mid-game to the fact that his game plan was was in a weird way going better than it was supposed to. It's like a bench player in the NBA coming in and scoring 30, so he's in for crunch time because he's hot and can't miss, when he was never supposed to be in the game in crunch time in a game in which he scores 12 points or whatever like he normally does. I think that Kevin Cash, whether it was just he was married to his game plan, and I certainly get that, but sometimes you just have to look at what's on the field in front of you, and what was on the field in front of you is that the Dodgers were showing no signs of touching Blake Snell, other than the fact that they got one single in that inning before he was taken out. I certainly get it, but especially with what happened right after, it's just so hard to watch and so hard to swallow. Just as a sports fan, I just can't, and I can't even imagine as a Rays fan who is probably screaming and yelling at Kevin Cash for taking Snell out when he did.
Yeah, and one thing I think about kind of along those lines as well is that usually you've got major league teams playing 162 games in a season, and so teams are going to have their own formulas for success that over the course of a 162 game season or even a 60 game season like we had this year. Over the course of the season, it'll kind of level out. Maybe there'll be times when that sort of formula, if you're going to stick to it in a rigid way, maybe that'll backfire a few times, but it'll work out more than that. And your end result, your net result will be, a positive form, that formula working in a positive way. But when you're in the World Series and you absolutely must win this one game, there's a point in which, going with the formula that may pay off in the long run doesn't matter, because you have to win that game. I mean, you have to win that game. You don't have to win. You don't have to put if that's a winning formula, great. But if it's a winning formula in the long term, and it may not be the best formula for winning one individual game.
That's a good point.
And like you said, it's about flexibility, and it's about adapting. And I feel like that's just when you boil it, when you simplify it down to that, and you look at these two teams and see that Cash just didn't adapt. I mean, he did not adapt to the game circumstances, and I think that's something you just have to do in all sports. And I think that's the bigger discussion here, more than just the analytics versus go with your gut. It's how flexible do you have to be to have a game plan, but also adjust to the circumstances of the game. I feel like that's the bigger takeaway. Like you said, I think you hit the nail on the head with that one.
One last thing before I let you go. Do you know, trivia time, how did the Dodgers get the last two outs of this baseball game?
Well, I only know because, I know because I watched it, but I know particularly, I have it off the top of my head because I heard you talk about it at the top of the show. It was two straight strikeouts looking, right?
Yes. Two straight strikeouts looking right down, and they were both four-seam fastballs, so it's not like it was a curveball that got you looking and froze you up. I mean, both Brousseau, and it wasn't Wendell, it was Brousseau, but Brousseau had a great at-bat, he did, and then he watched a 94-mile-an-hour fastball that was essentially right down the middle. It was the exact same pitch twice, and both of them looked right at it. Now, I knew Adames was going to strike out in three pitches, like, he just threw four fastballs right down the middle, and Adames couldn't do anything about it. But if you ever catch me striking out looking to end a World Series, I don't know. You tell me to hang it up and not take no for an answer, because it just drives me crazy that we saw two strikeout lookings on fastballs right down the middle. The last two at bats didn't look like a team that was about to lose their World Series.
Yeah, I feel like, I think I saw the stat last night that's only happened. You've only had a strikeout looking to end the World Series, like something like you could count on one hand the number of times that's happened in World Series history. Not a very common occurrence. And the Rays, a team that has all this fight in them that we've seen be so resilient, they just looked anything but in that final inning. And not you expected to see the Rays go down, even if they were going to go down, for sure.
Yeah, ultimately not the reason that they lost the game by any stretch of the imagination, but right. I was frustrated with the plate appearances in the top of the ninth. Chris, it's always a pleasure to talk baseball with you. If it's going to be, hopefully it'll be a little while. Hopefully we don't have a reason in a week to come and talk about how there are 20 positive COVID tests on the Dodgers roster. But it's been a pleasure to talk baseball with you throughout the season.
Yeah, absolutely, Josh. Hopefully you're right. Hopefully this situation with Turner and the COVID situation doesn't get any worse there. And it's been that situation aside, it's been a really great season. Didn't know if we'd actually end up getting it in the way that we have. So it's been a great experience, and thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. That's Chris Brown, 110 Sports baseball guy. We'll have to find something else for him to do. He's been killing the baseball game recently, and I'm sure he'll continue to cover it throughout the off season. But coming up next, we'll wrap up the show. We'll find something to talk about and do some FYI here on a Wednesday. You're watching the JMULL Show, 110sportsmedia.com. Welcome back to the JMULL Show on a Wednesday, twitch.tv/110sports, 110sportsmedia.com/live. So we had some pretty big news in the college basketball world on Monday after the show. I believe it was after the show. Anyways, ESPN basically ghosting on all of their multi-team events that they own they were going to do in a college basketball bubble of sorts to start the season. With how many different protocols the different conferences have, it makes a lot of sense that they did what they did. I certainly am not blaming them at all. It looks like we're going to have some different MTEs at the beginning of the season to make up for it. just this morning, Matt Norlander over at CBS Sports said that the Fort Myers tip-off field is set. Kansas, Gonzaga, Auburn, and St. Joe's. So that's a lot of fun. And I'm excited for that. We'll get to see Gonzaga versus Kansas, two of the best teams in the country per usual. Excuse me. Sorry about that. But that's an impossible puzzle with all of the different conference protocols and the fact that it's just different. And then ESPN, that Disney, and if you want to come and play in our tournaments, you have to abide to these rules. And some of those rules are more strict than other conferences have. So it sort of fell apart. You know, the NBA, by targeting a December 22nd start date with a 72-game season, they took the safe route. Instead of losing a ton of money 100% and then not even being totally sure that they'll be able to put fans in the stands in March or whatever for a 30-40 game season, they're going to get all the money from the TV deals that they can, play a 72 game season, and then maybe hopefully along the way you can put fans in the arenas. I say that to say that I think college basketball might benefit from looking at that and understanding that maybe taking the safest route is the best call, and the safest route being Big Ten conference games only. I don't think that's actually going to be the case. I don't think that's what they're going to do. They're going to try to play non-conference games and have these early season round robin style events, and it'll be fun. But it also it puts a lot of, it adds to the uncontrollable variables, and that's indisputable. And hopefully we don't get to a point where that results in the cancellation of seasons, but it is a lot easier to just coordinate between conferences and play within conferences, and then let the NCAA say, listen, you can abide to our rules for the NCAA tournament, or you just don't play. You decide. Hopefully it goes well, but I think the safest way for college basketball to get a full season in is to play only conference games. It looks like we're going to try to have non-conference stuff, but I think there might be some merit to trying to making it as easy as possible. For your information, Corey Seager, the 2020 World Series MVP, had a really nice series. That's no surprise there. I thought Kershaw had a shot, but Seager just a little bit better. Florida, the University of football team, continues to just have COVID test after COVID test, and a positive test, and it's just bad. They reported 6 COVID cases among football players during the past week, bringing their total tests to it's around 30 over the last month or so. It's clearly just not under control with the Florida Gators. And then, of course, Touchline Talk with Josh Doring tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern, followed by Chris Brown with Around the Bases at 1 p.m. Eastern. Those are both tomorrow in the middle of the day. And I'll be back on Friday. We'll wrap up the week, whatever there is to talk about when we get to that point. But thank you so much for joining us for this edition of the JMULL Show. Stay safe until we see you again on Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern, twitch.tv/110sports, 110sportsmedia.com.